Hey everyone, welcome to our second round of Demystifying AI, everything you ever wanted to know but were afraid to ask. I'm Amy Sandler, the lead coach and podcast host at Radical Candor. I'm here with Jason Rosoff, our CEO and co-founder. Kim Scott is out today, but I trust I will ask the questions. I will try to channel Kim as well. Jason, in just a moment, we'll see what you've got cooked up for us as our chief tinkerer. But for you all who are joining us, first of all, welcome. We're excited for you to be here. We have allocated 30 minutes for this session. If we get through it quickly, we're happy to give you the time back. But go ahead, put questions or comments that you've got wherever you're answering. We'll do our best to answer them live. And with that, Jason, what's on your mind for today's session?
So I wanted to follow up on something we touched on last time. So in the first session, we covered like how to access the various these like AI large language models through their chat interfaces. So we talked about Claude, which is Claude.ai. We talked about Google Gemini, which is Gemini.google.com. Uh, and we talked about ChatGPT, which is chat.openai.com. If you want to type that into your browser, that's how you access all three of those. And one of the things that I mentioned as we were talking through those is that even though the conversation about AI feels very new, in fact, AI has been an important part of the sort of computational tools that we've used for a long time. And the most common example of this is search. And we sort of brought up Google search, and we did a random example of searching for what the largest state in the US was and how do you calculate that. And we demonstrated the difference between what search results can produce and what AI can produce in response to that question. And AI can provide a much stronger sort of narrative or explanation, whereas search is providing data sources, right? It's saying, here are some authoritative sources that might answer your question. And the reason why I think this is important is because since we're so used to that process of typing
Mm-hmm.
something into search and seeing a list of what it considers to be reasonably high quality or authoritative sources, I think it's really easy to get into the mental model that the same thing is happening when you're typing your question into one of these GPTs, into one of these chatbots backed by a large language model. And that is in fact, not what is happening. It's actually the wrong mental model to have. And that carries some risks if you have that incorrect mental model.
So, just so we're clear, before we get into, and I think you're going to show us some examples of how the different chat models sort of do their version of search. But from your current understanding of where we are with search right now, like if you're looking something up, just using Google search, for example, hasn't even how they're ranking things changed in terms of how are they determining what gets to top results or what is a credible result right now?
Yeah, so just like all other AIs, there's this thing called a model that underlies how search produces its results. And essentially, what a model does is it's sort of like a processor that takes a set of inputs and produces a set of outputs. And the Google actually does update its search model every single year. One of the things that Google announced in its latest update to its search model is they've had to make some changes to the sort of AI that's powering those search results. They have had to make some changes to deal with the explosion of AI generated sort of clutter sites on the
Mm-hmm.
internet. Uh, Many people have probably had the experience in the recent past of like typing something into Google and being like, wow, these results are actually kind of crappy. Or you click onto one of those, this has happened to me more than once. You click onto one of those articles and it sort of seems relevant at first, but the further you scroll down, the more sort of insane the article becomes. And it's like, it's very clear at some point that you're in an AI hallucination, like the machine has gotten out of control and the information that you're looking at is no longer relevant. And so that critical evaluation of those sources is really important. And it takes time for the humans to learn how to teach the computer to identify those low quality pages and sources. And
So,
so that's why they update it every year. Yeah.
So just so I'm clear, so right now we're talking about you go to just your search bar or google.com and you type something in search and you'll get a bunch of results, and you're saying that Google search is updating that annually, and you still might get some not great results, but we kind of have one model for that. And then what you're going to talk about today is how, if you're actually going to be using one of these chat sites, whether it's Claude
Yep.
or Gemini or ChatGPT, how are they delivering, if you're going to do sort of apples to apples, the same kind of search? How is it different to what we might be used to from Google search?
Correct. So and I think that the reason why this is on my mind is, as I said, like it's easy to sort of have the same mental model for both of these things. But remember, the goal of Google search, at least nominally, is to give you primary sources of information. That's the goal of Google search. And there's a big difference between that and narrative or analysis that you get back from these GPTs. So let's dive in. I'm gonna
And
bring my
thank you,
screen up.
Megan, for putting in the comments some additional info, which we'll do our best to get to as well. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that's the nitty gritty. If you are running, and in fact, like if you run a website that distributes content on the internet, it is worth reading the developer update from Google this year to understand the things that they're trying to do to combat some of the AI clutter sites and things like that that have popped up recently. Okay, so um, let's bring up Gemini, and I'm gonna go back to the beginning. So I asked Gemini who won the 2024 NCAA Women's Championship, and Gemini was able to produce an answer. It said the University of South Carolina won the 2024 NCAA Women's Championship and capped off an undefeated season by defeating Iowa Hawkeyes. Very exciting. Now I'm going to
Including
flip
an
over.
exclamation point.
Correct. Now I'm going to flip over to ChatGPT 3.5. So this is important. So the model 3.5 is not the most current version, but it is the fastest, cheapest, and freely available version of ChatGPT. And I asked the same question: who won the 2024 NCAA Women's Championship? And ChatGPT responded, as my last update in January 2022, I can't provide real-time information. To find out the winner, I recommend checking the latest news or visiting the official NCAA websites for updates on the tournament.
And well, I have
Okay,
two questions on that, Jason. First of all, I think you're going to show the difference between 3.5 and 4, but it's interesting when it says checking the latest news or visiting the official NCAA website. So it doesn't actually give you a link or anything. It's just giving you some ideas of what to do, but it's not like linking to them.
correct. And then I'm going to jump over to Claude, and then I'll come back. You know what? I'll show ChatGPT 4.
Okay.
So to switch between this is like another thing that may not be obvious to everybody who signs into this for the first time. When you ask a new question, so if we do new question, because I'm a paying customer, I get ChatGPT by default 4 by default. But you might get something different. So you're going to want to check this dropdown and see if you're set to ChatGPT 3.5 or if you're set to GPT-4. So we showed what the 3.5 response was, which is like, hey, I'm only trained through January 2022. So let's see. Who won the NCAA Women's Championship in 2024? So this says that South Carolina won the 2024 NCAA Women's Basketball Championship, defeating the Iowa Hawkeyes with a final score of 87-75. So it clearly was able to answer this question. If you notice, this is kind of hard to read probably, but next to GPT-4 or below that, it has this little helper text that says GPT-4 runs with DALL-E, which is an image generator, browsing and analysis. And it's using this browsing feature to actually come up with that information. So I can ask it, how did you figure that out? Now, I asked this question before we got on, and so you'll notice it says I figured that out by searching for the winner and found information stating that South Carolina Gamecocks won against the Iowa Hawkeyes from NBC Sports. We ran this just before we got on, and though it found the same information, it referenced a New York Post article. And so even though this is searching the web, it's telling you something kind of important that it's not able to precisely tell you what its source is. So I want to just switch over. I want to come back to that point. I want to switch over to Claude just to show that Claude also has a limitation, which is, hey, I'm an AI language model. My knowledge is based on data up till August 2023. Since this is about something in 2024, I don't have the information to provide the answer. And anything questions that's raising for you, Amy, before I dive in?
Well, I think this was a little bit with the New York Post and the other, the NBC link. And I was curious from the 3.5 that it didn't even give you the NCAA website. It sort of was all text. So it just
Yep.
made me wonder, like, would you never get in 3.5 any links? Like, is it not going to give you any references?
So let's see what happens.
Okay.
What would be a good site to use to find this information, and
And I
what
notice it does have get
do I
citation in the
have?
bottom right there too.
Yes, that's confusing because that's a plugin that I have
Oh,
that's not
okay.
related to
So
ChatGPT.
nothing to see here, friends. A good
So
site.
it would be the NCAA website, but it doesn't give me a link.
Yep.
Let's see. What if I ask explicitly? So if I
Oh,
push, it
it takes a lot
it will
of.
give it to me. Um, and it's sort of interesting, like that to your point that it didn't automatically
Yeah.
try to be helpful. Um, and neither did Claude. And I think the primary reason why that's the case, the primary reason why it is focused on this, it was a safety related thing. So the safety issue here is when the model knows that it doesn't have the information that you're looking for, it's supposed to tell you I don't have that
Okay.
information. And until I change the context of the request to ask it for information that it does have, uh, it it's going to be it without that change in context. Like it doesn't necessarily, without changing the framing of the question, doesn't necessarily know what information to give back. And that's like a general point about interacting with these AIs, which is the more context that you give an AI, the better the response that it generates. But I want to go. I'm going to switch over one more time to look at the way that Gemini responded to this request,
Okay.
because I thought it was interesting when I asked it, how did you figure out that the University of South Carolina won? It says, I have access. I've been trained on a massive data set of text and code, which includes information about past sporting events. This allows me to recall details like championship winners from recent years. And then I have search capabilities. When you ask the question, I was able to quickly search the web for relevant information. And then it has this. While I cannot directly display URLs in my
Hmm.
response, this is a limitation that the engineers have created. Searching for terms like 2024 NCAA Women's Champion or South Carolina Women's Basketball Championship would have led me to the sources that confirming their victory. In this case, both my internal knowledge and search capabilities align to provide you with the answer. And this brings up what I think are two very important things to be aware of when you are getting started using any sort of AI. One of them is most of the work that's happening in the AI is based on this training that happens on data from the past. So, like, if you think about it this way, um, how does the AI know how to speak English? You know what I'm saying? That is based on all this training data from the past. And then some AIs have added, some of these large language model companies have added the capability of uh, what's called, it's like they can add a document or a set of documents into combine that with all that old training data to provide you a new answer. So what Gemini was telling us is like, hey, so what I did was I searched the web and I found some what I thought were relevant, valid results as to what this was. And then I used all of my training data from the past to generate an intelligible response for you and explain to you that it was the South Carolina women's basketball team that won the NCAA 2024 championship. The reason why that sequence of events is important is twofold. One, when you're asking about something that maybe happened more than once and you don't give a specific timeline. So for example, if you if we ask a question about elections in a particular country, but we don't give the years of the elections that we're interested in, the AI may be pulling from old information, and the information we might be really looking for is new information. So it's important to understand that the models don't necessarily have access to the most up-to-date information when we're asking questions. So that should cause us to be critical of how we review the answers that we get. The second thing is the models can't tell you, most of them can't tell you specifically how it arrived at the response that it did when it is using those search capabilities. So Gemini and GPT-4 both include the ability, have a feature which is basically use my big model that is trained on all the data of language and human history, and then combine it with some new documents to come up with an answer. But it can't describe, or I should say, the engineers have disabled have told the AI not to describe specifically how it arrived at that response, which is why when we asked GPT-4, first it said, here's an example from the New York Post. And then the second time it's like, here's an example from NBC Sports. And in each of those cases, it's not actually telling you, this is where I got the answer. What it is telling you is, here is a representative article that contains information relevant to the query that you made.
And so just so I'm clear, and you said about safety, but they disabled it. Can you explain a little bit more about the thinking behind the disabling of specifically where they got it versus saying, hey, this is where you could get it?
So the real explanation for that is probably very technical, that is beyond my understanding. But I think the simplest possible explanation is that most of the models don't keep track of their internal knowledge state. So if you think about, how do you know that you know something? You know what I'm saying? Like, how does a person know that they
Yeah,
know something? Uh,
interesting.
like
Like,
these
I know
chat
that my AirPod is falling out because I can feel it, but how do I
right.
how
How
do
do
I
you
know
know
what
what?
to actually do to get it back, and how do I explain that?
Correct. So that's part of the challenge, is that the models don't maintain that information. But I think more importantly, the reason that they don't do it is that there's a desire for some opacity here, some flexibility, because they may have to, that kind of thing might change,
Mhm.
over time. And so I don't, they may at some point in the future introduce a feature that has a much more rigorous set of, sources for a particular search. But for now, it's disabled. So part of it is functionality of the software itself, and part of it is I think a sort of self-protective or policy decision about how
Mhm.
much of the inner working of the model they want to expose to users.
So for sort of everyday use and for people who are just getting started, what would you say is the takeaway for, like, if I wanna find out, who won the women's championship, I'm still gonna probably go to Google search, but why would I use a version of that in Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini? Self-actual That's a deep one
Yeah.
because that would allow for self-actualization.
Yes, I think not quite. I think there's multiple steps to get to self-actualization, from maintaining an internal knowledge state about how the answer to a particular question was arrived at. But it's certainly related to sort of the idea of general intelligence or self-actualized AI. Um, before I think the most important thing that I want to say is, if you are using AIs to get, these chatbots in particular, to gather information, remember that you are not getting primary sources. And remember that if they do offer you links, it doesn't necessarily mean that those are the specific links that the AI used to generate the response that you're looking at,
Can you go
which
back and
means,
show us that again, just to
yeah,
kind of reinforce that message?
sure. So, oops, here we go. If we, like Gemini says, I cannot directly display URLs in my response. That they have is just a feature that's turned off. And it says searching for terms like this would have led me. Um, it's anthropomorphizing itself. Would have led me to sources confirming the victory of the South Carolina basketball team. I, I think, and if we go back to um, and if you think about what AI is doing for you in this case, really what it's doing is it's giving you a leg up. It's sort of saying, here's like a quick response to the question that you have. But you still, if you wanted to use that information to make a compelling case for your business, for example, that it should invest or not invest in something, you really need to go a step further and actually find those primary sources. So like the AI is helping maybe point you in the right direction, but the job of verifying the information that the AI produces still at this moment falls on the user's shoulders. And it's just really, really important to remember that. In fact, there have been a couple of, I would say, amusing like things that have happened. I mean, I don't think the judges were amused, but there have been a couple of court cases where judges have uh, turned back the work that was submitted by lawyers because they used AI to generate a legal argument for a particular point in the case, and the AI's hallucinated case law. They'd literally made up out of whole cloth, like that a particular case happened in a particular jurisdiction that it supported the argument that the lawyer was trying to make. And when the court did the research to actually, when the judge was reviewing the argument and did the research, they were like, this case never happened. Like this is made up. And the lawyer didn't do the work to actually check whether or not that thing existed. So I think this tool is very powerful and it's really, really helpful um, when it has all the context that it needs. When it is missing any context, the likelihood that you're going to get an answer that is partially made up gets much higher, and the pressure on you to validate that the response that you're getting is actually accurate and useful goes up. So we can help the AI by giving it more and more context, being more and more specific in our queries, but you have to be cautious that even when we do that, we could get a response back that is inaccurate.
So, like, for example, in this case, if we wanted to know what's the main reason why South Carolina won, is that something that we would be better off doing in Google search, or would that be an interesting thing to look at in one of
Well,
these chatbots?
I think it's interesting. That we already know from this experiment that we have to talk to a chatbot that has the search capability. So for it
The
to have
most
a
up to date.
yeah, so for it to have a chance. So let's say what was the biggest factor that led to South Carolina's victory? Okay, so AI humility. Well, I cannot definitively say what the biggest factor was. I can search the web to find some possible reasons for their success. Some news articles discussing a championship game might mention factors like strong all-around performance, excellent coaching, key plays or shots made by the Carolina players, or weaknesses in the Iowa team that South Carolina was able to exploit. I think that this is like a pretty responsible AI answer, right? It's like I don't feel confident in my ability to tell you that. Let's see if ChatGPT is as humble. Let me save myself some typing.
And this is in Chat GPT-4. So 3.5, like you said, wouldn't have been able to even look into this. Oh my. The rebounding.
So GPT-4, less humility. And this is so I think this is
Is
actually a
that
really
called
good
is that called
example.
is that called chat splaining?
This is actually a really good example of like a time when you really need to read the article. Um, because I'm not even confident that this is what the article says. You know what I'm saying? Like I would
Mhm.
look at that like with a big grain of salt, and I would say, okay, let me see if I can validate that. And not only would I read the article that it references here, but I would wind up doing my own search to say, what are what are show me some analysis of the championship game,
Oh, you know what
the
I'm
South
just
Carolina
noticing
championship
is
game.
really interesting is that you said victory and it went to the championship, but then it said particularly noted in their matchup against Iowa. So I'm interpreting that they looked at like why they won the whole thing, not just why they won that one specific game. So I wonder if the question was asked, um, South Carolina's victory against Iowa. You still might get the rebounding, but it seemed like they were answering more broadly.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really good example of like how context impacts
Hmm.
uh, the the question. So when even though this is a distinct question, what was the biggest factor that led to South Carolina's victory? The the chat bot is actually keeping track of the context of this conversation. So it knows that I was asking about the championship.
Yep.
um, uh, that context it does maintain, and this is one of the reasons why um, I think chat interfaces are actually a bit of a breath of fresh air for a lot of people. Is that you can incrementally give it context. A Google search, if you put in a Google search and you're like NCAA women's basketball, like it probably will return the stuff about the championship, the most recent championship, but it might return the results about the men's championship. And
Hmm.
so to get Google to refine, you have to like start the search again. But to get ChatGPT to refine, there's sort of this sort of give and take, the back and forth that you can have with it. And I think that it is can be really helpful.
And just to be clear on that, that's only in this one conversation. So if you started a new conversation, would it remember this or would you be starting from scratch?
You would be starting from scratch in most cases, but if we look down the left-hand side of the interface, you'll see that it remembers the conversations that I had in at least for like the previous 30 or 90 days. I can't remember what the actual timeline is.
Mm.
So I can always go back to one of those conversations. But if I were to start a brand new conversation, it starts with no context.
It's not going to refer back even if it's in your banner to the left. It won't reference that.
Yeah, and that's part of like helping keep your data safe, the information that you put into ChatGPT safe. It is not cross-referencing those conversations. Is an effort to minimize the chance that your information is going to leak out in
Gotcha.
someone else's chat.
So, Jason, just as we're coming up, we've got just one or two more minutes. Anything that you feel like hasn't been said yet or that you want to reiterate as a real kind of next step for folks exploring the difference between the search we're familiar with and searching with our different GPTs?
I will say that that I have been using task-specific search in various chat AIs. So like, for example, how do I write code that does this specific thing, or how do I bake, a brown butter chocolate chip cookie? And I have found that GPT's answers, like the various chat AI's answers, are great for those things. So I would encourage everybody to like ask their questions. And what I would say is, anytime you need to relying on that information, there's no way to test the validity of that information. So for code, the way that I can test the validity of the information is I can like write the code and then see if it does what I want it to do. And for the recipe, I have a good enough understanding of recipes to say like, hey, this actually seems pretty reasonable, and I can try the recipe out and I'll know whether or not it's a good recipe. Um, but for information that you're relying on for decision making, for example, so like what are the market conditions in my industry? That's the kind of thing where you're going to need to combine the information you get with from AI with primary sources in order to be
Especially if you're
confident.
arguing a legal case is the cautionary
Well,
tale we heard
yeah, I
as
don't know how many lawyers
that
are in our audience, but I would say like, yeah, you're going to want to be especially careful of relying on it for technical knowledge that you cannot test yourself. Um, in that case, I think the lawyer could have caught it themselves. And that's why if they referred to first sources and they like used that principle, they would have searched for that case and found that it didn't exist.
Well, I learned a lot. I hope that was interesting for you all. Thanks for joining. We're gonna keep unpacking this. Maybe we'll explore self-actualization in a future,
Or image
session.
generation,
Image
maybe,
generation.
instead of
Let's
self-actualization.
start
Yeah,
with start with image generation, and thanks for the developers, link as well. We'll see you all soon.
take care.
Bye-bye.